International Travellers Bill, first reading.
I call the Honourable David Carter.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Airports Cost Recovery for Processing of International Travellers Bill be now read a first time. At the appropriate time, I intend to move that the Airports Cost Recovery for Processing of International Travellers Bill be considered by the Primary Production Select Committee, that the committee present its final report on or before 15 November 2010, and that the committee have authority to meet at any time while the House is sitting, except during oral questions and during any evening on a day in which there has been a sitting of the House, and on a Friday in a week in which there has been a sitting of the House, despite Standing Orders 187 and 191B and C. Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to bring the Airports Cost Recovery for Processing of International Travellers Bill to the House for its first reading. The bill will enable the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, the Aviation Security Service and the New Zealand Customs Service to recover the costs associated with providing passenger processing services at new and restarting international airports. The purpose of the bill is to address a problem that arises when airport companies enter or exit, then re-enter the market for scheduled international passenger flights to and from New Zealand. New and restarting international airports have no incentive to factor the government's cost for providing international passenger processing services into their business decisions. This means that the government is exposed to an unpredictable and uncertain cost for providing aviation security, biosecurity and customs passenger processing services. Under the current funding model, the commencement of a new international airport creates a funding shortfall for government's border agencies. This places pressures on the delivery of existing services until appropriations can be adjusted. The object of this bill is therefore to reduce the government's exposure to an unpredictable fiscal liability. The cost recovery introduced by the bill will ensure that international airports or requesters of non-routine services factor the border agency costs into their business decisions. Mr Speaker, before I discuss the key provisions of this bill, I'd like to briefly explain the background. The Airports Cost Recovery for Processing of International Travellers Bill 2010 completes funding arrangements agreed with the aviation industry back in 2004. In 2004, a ministerial committee examined the funding of passenger clearance services in New Zealand and developed a set of proposals on how passenger processing services at international airports could be funded and implemented. The proposals form the basis of a consultation document published in May 2004. This work looked at the overall financial costs and benefits of passenger processing services and how these should be shared between Crown and industry. As a result of the extensive industry consultation that occurred at that time, the previous government agreed that the costs of aviation security services would be met by the airline industry and the costs of biosecurity and customs passenger clearance processing services would be met by the Crown at established international airports. This funding approach has been in place since 2004. But significantly, it was also agreed in 2004 that aviation security, biosecurity and customs services at new international airports and low-volume international airports should be funded by cost recovery, and any variation to the standard passenger processing service should be funded by the person requesting the non-routine service. Now, in 2010, the government is introducing the primary legislation required to enable these cost recovery components to be implemented. Mr Speaker, this bill covers passenger processing services provided by Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, the New Zealand Customs Service and Aviation Security Service. For cost recovery at new and restart international airports, the bill provides that regulations need to be made before charging can begin. Regulations will not be made without agencies consulting with the parties directly affected. The costs that may be recovered are costs associated with establishing and operating passenger processing services. These costs will be recovered from the airport operator. Mr. Speaker, the idea from 2004 of cost recovery applying to international airports based on passenger volumes, while sound in economic theory, was not a pragmatic funding approach. A simple, fixed time period for cost recovery is a more practical approach. The bill sets a maximum cost recovery period of 3 years and allows for shorter period to be described in regulations. The government favours setting the cost recovery period at 2 years to provide enough time for a new or restarting airport to demonstrate that it has a viable business model before becoming eligible for Crown funding. The government is keen to hear the industry's views on the proposal that the cost recovery period be set at 2 years, and I trust that the Select Committee will invite the industry to make submissions on this issue during the Select Committee process. The original 2004 policy did not address the situation where an international airport stops having regular scheduled international flights for a period of time, but then restarts scheduled international flights. In 2008, following consultation with industry, the previous government agreed that a restart international airport should be funded in the same manner as a new international airport. However, industry asked for a reasonable grace period where scheduled flights cease so that an established airport company can find a replacement airline without triggering cost recovery. The idea of a grace period has a strong ring of pragmatism and fairness about it. A grace period is a desirable position for all parties concerned. It is simple and transparent. It encourages government to hold passenger processing services in place and rewards airport companies for establishing viable long-term operations. This government has agreed to a maximum grace period of 6 months, and this is written into the bill. The bill also provides the ability for agencies to cost recover for non-routine passenger clearance services provided at any airport. Costs will be invoiced on an actual and reasonable basis. An example of a non-routine service would be when a VIP clearance service is requested for a celebrity international traveller. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, this bill completes the funding arrangements agreed with the aviation industry back in 2004. It builds on the original policy to provide a simple, clear and efficient cost recovery system. The cost recovery introduced by this bill will ensure that international airports or requesters of non-routine services factor the border agency's costs into their business decision. This in turn will ensure that the government is not exposed to an unpredictable and unlimited fiscal liability for providing passenger processing services. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.